Emily Collins loved her life. She was the kind of woman who felt fulfilled in ways she never imagined possible. Motherhood wasn't just something she embraced, it became a core part of her identity. From the moment Sophie was born, Emily found joy in the small moments. Early morning cuddles, making dinosaur-shaped sandwiches, reading bedtime stories under a blanket fort. She felt lucky. Marriage to Ryan was everything she had hoped for. They'd met young, but they grew together, not apart. Ryan, with his quiet stability, was her rock. He worked hard as a financial analyst, often long hours, but Emily never resented him for it. They both had their roles. Ryan provided and Emily nurtured. It was a rhythm that worked for them. Sure, there were occasional frustrations, forgotten anniversaries or the endless stream of bills, but those were just part of life. Emily didn't sweat the small stuff. She knew she was loved, and that was enough. They weren't perfect, but they were happy, or so she thought. Emily and Ryan's love story was the kind people admired. They met in their sophomore year of college. Emily, the arts major with a flair for painting, and Ryan, the business student with a penchant for numbers. They collided at a campus mixer, Emily spilling a drink on Ryan's shirt. He laughed it off, offered her a fresh drink, and stayed by her side for the rest of the night. Ryan was different from the other boys Emily had known. Reliable, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in what she had to say. He grounded her in ways she didn't know she needed. She, in turn, brought color and spontaneity into his otherwise structured life. They balanced each other perfectly. 2 years after they graduated, they married. The wedding was simple but beautiful, held in Emily's parents' garden under the summer sun. They were young and full of dreams, excited about the future that lay ahead of them. When they decided to start a family, everything felt right. Sophie's arrival only strengthened their bond. Parenthood wasn't without challenges, but they faced them together, a team. And for a while, life was everything Emily had ever wanted. With Sophie starting kindergarten, Emily found herself in a good place. She loved working as a freelance designer from home, allowing her to be present for every milestone in Sophie's life. She'd pick Sophie up from school, bake cookies together in the afternoons, and listen to her daughter's animated retellings of the day's events. Every evening, Ryan would walk through the door, exhausted from work, but always greeted with Sophie running into his arms. They would share dinner together, simple moments that Emily cherished deeply. On weekends, they'd visit the park or have family movie nights with popcorn and pillow forts. There was a comfort in their routines, a sense that they had built something good and lasting. Emily often thought about how lucky she was. She had the life she always wanted, a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, and a home filled with warmth. The thought that anything could disrupt their happiness never crossed her mind, until Claire Maddox entered their lives. Claire Maddox was Sophie's kindergarten teacher, a friendly and outgoing woman with an infectious laugh and a way of making the children feel special. Emily liked her immediately. Claire seemed like one of those people who had endless energy, always upbeat and ready to chat with the parents during pickups and school events. Emily found herself chatting with Claire often. They talked about Sophie's progress, about motherhood, even about their favorite books. Claire was easy to talk to, and Emily was grateful for the connection. Making friends as a parent wasn't always easy. Ryan met Claire for the first time when he offered to drop Sophie off at school one morning. He'd been working late the night before and wanted to make up for missing bedtime. It was a normal meeting, just a few friendly words exchanged at the classroom door. Or so Emily thought. It started innocently enough. After that first meeting at the classroom door, Claire Maddox was simply another person in Ryan's world, his daughter's kindergarten teacher. But something about her lingered in his mind. Claire had a way of smiling at him that felt personal, as though she understood something about him that even Emily didn't. It was subtle at first, a flicker of curiosity, a small boost to his ego. When Ryan returned to the classroom a few days later to drop off Sophie's forgotten raincoat, Claire greeted him warmly, her voice soft and familiar. "You're a lifesaver," she said with a laugh. "Sophie would have melted without this." Ryan chuckled, feeling an unexpected ease in her presence. He wasn't used to conversations without expectations or logistics attached. With Emily, there were always lists, groceries, schedules, bills. With Claire, there were no demands, just friendly banter that made him feel light. From then on, their interactions became a regular part of his day. Ryan would drop Sophie off early, lingering for just a minute longer than necessary. Claire always seemed happy to see him, and Ryan enjoyed the attention. At first, he told himself it was nothing more than that, a little ego boost, an innocent connection. But things changed the day Ryan showed up for a parent-teacher conference, just him, without Emily. It was a chilly autumn afternoon, and the classroom smelled faintly of crayons and cinnamon from an earlier craft project. Claire sat across from Ryan, flipping through Sophie's progress report, her fingers grazing the papers in a way that made him oddly aware of how delicate they looked. Ryan wasn't paying attention to the report. Instead, he was noticing how Claire's blouse dipped slightly at the collarbone, how she tucked a strand of red hair behind her ear every few minutes, and how easily they laughed together, like old friends. "Sophie's doing really well," Claire said warmly. "You and Emily must be so proud." Ryan smiled, but there was a flicker of discomfort in his chest. Emily, his wife. It was only when Claire said her name that Ryan remembered how far he'd already drifted. Just a little, barely noticeable. But the current was there, pulling him towards something dangerous. As the conference ended, Claire gave him a knowing smile. "It's nice talking to you, Ryan. I feel like we always run out of time." Her words lingered, and so did her gaze. For a moment, Ryan felt suspended between two worlds, one where he was the husband, father, and provider, and another where he was simply Ryan, a man with desires and flaws. It was the way she looked at him in that moment, a subtle invitation wrapped in casual friendliness that made something shift inside him. He knew then that this wasn't just harmless. This was temptation, and it thrilled him. The first text came later that night. Claire sent a playful message about Sophie's artwork. "Your kiddo's got talent. Watch out, she'll be teaching me soon." Ryan smiled at the message longer than he should have before replying with a witty remark. That small exchange became the foundation for something far more dangerous. Over the next few days, the messages became a routine. A morning, "Have a great day," or a random thought during lunch. Claire would send pictures of Sophie's drawings, and Ryan would reply with jokes or compliments. The tone was light, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Each message felt like a small secret they shared. Ryan started anticipating Claire's texts in ways that made him feel guilty. When his phone buzzed and it wasn't her, he felt a pang of disappointment. And Claire knew exactly what she was doing. A few weeks later, Claire asked Ryan if he could stop by the classroom after drop-off. "I need help carrying some things to the car," she said, her tone breezy. When Ryan arrived, the school was quiet, the hallways empty. Claire was waiting, a playful grin on her face. "You're my hero," she said, as she handed him a box filled with books. After loading the books into her car, they stood awkwardly in the parking lot, neither of them quite ready to leave. The conversation shifted from light small talk to something deeper. Claire talking about her love of teaching, how she felt burned out sometimes but couldn't imagine doing anything else. Ryan found himself opening up too, about his stressful job, the constant pressure to provide, and how sometimes it felt like everyone depended on him. Claire listened, really listened, in a way that felt rare to Ryan. Emily listened too, but there was always a child crying in the background, a deadline looming, or a sink full of dishes. With Claire, it was different. She was fully present, her green eyes locked on his, as though nothing else in the world mattered. When Claire lightly touched his arm and said, "You're doing better than you think," it felt like a lifeline. Ryan knew in that moment that he was slipping, crossing a boundary that couldn't be uncrossed. But he didn't stop. He didn't want to. The kiss happened a week later. Ryan had stopped by Claire's classroom once again, this time under the pretense of checking on Sophie's upcoming class project. They were alone, standing close, their voices low, and before Ryan knew what was happening, Claire leaned in. For a split second, he hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, screaming at him to pull away. But then Claire's lips brushed against his and the world tilted. The kiss was soft, fleeting, but it was enough to ignite something in both of them, something wild and reckless. When they pulled apart, Claire gave him a mischievous smile, as if to say, "There's no going back now." Ryan knew he should feel guilt. He should feel ashamed. But all he felt was exhilaration. And so the affair began, not with a dramatic confession or a grand betrayal, but with small, stolen moments that slowly became everything. Ryan and Claire became masters of discretion. They found ways to be alone. A long lunch here, an extended school pickup there. They met in coffee shops across town, exchanged secret glances at school events, and slipped away during Ryan's late nights at work. Each encounter deepened their connection, and the thrill of secrecy only heightened the allure. They told themselves it was harmless, just two people finding solace in each other. But deep down, both knew the truth. They were playing with fire. Ryan convinced himself that as long as Emily didn't know, no one would get hurt. Claire, too, justified the affair in her mind. It wasn't like they were trying to break up a family. This was just for them, a guilty pleasure they shared. But the lies began to pile up. Ryan would come home to Emily, who greeted him with love and trust, and each time, it chipped away at him. He hated lying to her, but not enough to stop. Claire became a constant presence in his thoughts, invading every quiet moment. He'd be sitting at the dinner table, nodding along to Emily's stories about Sophie's day, all the while thinking about Claire's smile, her laugh, her touch. The affair was intoxicating, and it was spiraling out of control. Ryan had no idea that Emily, happy and trusting, was starting to notice the little things. The unexplained absences, the strange text messages, and the unfamiliar scent on his clothes. The perfect life they had built together was about to shatter. And when it did, the fallout would be deadly. Emily never imagined Ryan would betray her. She trusted him completely. But as the small inconsistencies began to stack up, Emily's mind refused to stay quiet. She noticed the subtle changes, how Ryan started taking longer to answer her texts, how he smiled at messages on his phone and brushed them off with vague excuses. The first real red flag came when Sophie, in her innocent chatter, mentioned, "Daddy stayed to talk to Miss Maddox after school again. They talk a lot." Sophie giggled. Ms. Maddox told him he's funny. A chill ran down Emily's spine, but she told herself it was nothing. Just a friendly conversation. Ryan was a social guy after all. But that night, as she lay awake, the uneasy feeling gnawed at her. Something wasn't right. The next day, while Ryan was at work, Emily took his jacket to the dry cleaner. As she emptied the pockets, a crumpled hotel receipt fell out. It was for a boutique hotel downtown, on a day Ryan had told her he'd been working late. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the receipt, disbelief crashing over her. Ryan had lied. But why? Emily's hands trembled as she sat on the bed, the truth slowly unfurling in her mind. She tried to tell herself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he had gone there for a business meeting. Maybe it wasn't what she feared. But deep down she knew. Her husband was having an affair. Emily didn't confront Ryan right away. She needed proof. She needed to know for certain. So she did what any desperate wife would do. She started investigating. She checked his phone when he was in the shower, carefully scrolling through his messages. But Ryan was cautious. He deleted texts and emails, leaving no incriminating traces. Still, Emily found patterns. Calls to an unfamiliar number, texts that were deleted within seconds, and Ryan's increasing absences. Emily's worst fears were confirmed one afternoon when she followed Ryan after work. Her heart raced as she trailed his car, staying far enough behind to remain unseen. He drove to Claire Maddox's apartment building, glanced around to make sure no one was watching, and slipped inside. Emily sat in her car, frozen as the truth settled over her like a suffocating weight. She stayed there for hours, waiting for Ryan to leave. When he finally emerged, disheveled and oblivious to her presence, Emily felt something inside her break. It wasn't just sadness or betrayal. It was rage. A deep, seething rage that demanded action. Emily knew she couldn't confront Ryan right away. If she stormed in with accusations, he'd deny everything, or worse, he'd leave her. She needed a plan, something final, something that would end this betrayal once and for all. She kept up appearances, pretending everything was fine. She smiled at Ryan, kissed him goodnight, and went about her daily routines as if nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, Emily was plotting. She studied Claire's schedule, learning when she'd be home, when she'd be alone. The rage inside her grew with each passing day. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control. Claire had taken her husband, stolen her trust, and violated her family. And Emily wasn't about to let her get away with it. It was a Friday evening when Emily put her plan into motion. Ryan was supposed to be working late, which Emily knew was a lie. She followed him to Claire's apartment, watching as he slipped inside like a thief in the night. Emily waited. She wasn't in a hurry. She wanted them to have their time. One last stolen moment before everything came crashing down. When Ryan finally left, Emily got out of her car. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She rang Claire's doorbell, and after a moment, the door swung open. Claire stood there, surprised but smiling, as if Emily's presence was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Emily," Claire said, her voice cautious. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Emily said, her tone calm but cold. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Claire closed the door behind her, her smile faltering as she sensed the tension in the air. "Is everything okay?" Emily turned to face her, and for a moment, she just stared. This was the woman who had stolen her husband, her happiness. Emily's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white with fury. "No," Emily said softly. "Everything is not okay." Claire tried to backpedal, offering excuses, trying to explain. "Ryan, he told me it was complicated. I thought—" "You thought what?" Emily interrupted, her voice sharp. "That you could take my husband and everything would be fine? That no one would get hurt?" Claire's eyes widened as she realized the danger she was in. She stepped back, reaching for her phone, but Emily was faster. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, her movements swift and deliberate. "Emily, please," Claire began, but her plea was cut short. The struggle was brief but violent. Claire fought back, clawing at Emily's arms, but Emily was driven by rage. The knife plunged into Claire's side and she gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Claire staggered, clutching the wound, and collapsed to the floor. Blood pooled beneath her, spreading across the tile like spilled wine. Emily stood over her, panting, the weight of the knife heavy in her hand. The room was silent except for Claire's labored breathing, which grew fainter with each passing second. And then, it stopped. Emily stared down at Claire's lifeless body. She knew she should feel something, remorse, guilt, fear, but all she felt was relief. It was over. She cleaned the knife, wiped down the surfaces she had touched, and left the apartment without a trace. The police would never suspect her. She was just the loyal wife, the loving mother. And Claire Maddox was nothing more than a tragic casualty of a supposed robbery gone wrong. When Ryan arrived home later that night, Emily greeted him with a kiss, her smile warm and reassuring. "How was work?" she asked sweetly. Ryan hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. "Long," he muttered. Emily smiled. "I'm glad you're home." And just like that, the perfect facade slipped back into place. Ryan would never know what had happened that night. He would never stray again. Emily had won, and she had learned something about herself in the process. She was capable of anything, even murder.